Good morning. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Juan Benitez. I'm a regional e-mobility consultant at the UN Environment Program. And today in our webinar, we're going to be speaking with Stephanie Cyril from ICCT. The topic we're going to be sharing today is about the US electric vehicle market and its impact on Latin America and the Caribbean. We're very excited about the topic. We're hearing every day about new emerging trends in the market. We're seeing the EV market growth, and we're seeing increased demand throughout every region in the world. We're seeing countries making commitments to decarbonizing their fleet, both at the public level, but also generating incentives to the private owners for purchasing electric vehicles. So there is new boom, and we're recognizing the importance of also seeing how that growth in certain parts of the world can also have benefits to other regions, right? And specifically, we're going to be talking today about the US and that emerging market and how Latin America can maybe benefit and what are some of the potential impacts of that growth. So Stephanie, welcome. We're very excited to have you today. And I'm going to pass the mic to you to hear a little bit about the work that you guys are doing at ICCT and also your perspective for the region. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Juan. It's really a pleasure to be here. I have some slides, and so I'm just going to share my screen. So let me just say a few words about myself and ICCT before I get started. The International Council on Clean Transportation is an independent nonprofit research organization headquartered in the United States, but with regional offices in some other countries, including Brazil. We focus on doing technical analysis and research to inform policymakers about how to strengthen policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution in the transportation sector. I'm the US director at ICCT, and I oversee our work on light and heavy-duty vehicles in the United States region. And so I'm happy to talk about some of the context of what's going on in the US right now and what it could mean for Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm going to start with just a broad overview of the US electric vehicle market. So electric vehicle market in the United States is growing from year to year. Here I'm showing some data from 2020 and 2021 for the United States compared to Europe and China. And in 2022, we know that electric vehicle penetration has grown even more. So in the United States, in 2021, we were at about 5% electric vehicle penetration, and I think that's up to maybe 7% for 2022. So it's growing to be fairly significant, but it's still fairly significantly behind Europe and China that are closer to 20% in 2022, I believe. In the United States, most electric vehicles that have been sold are full battery electric vehicles with a minority plug-in hybrids that still have a gasoline engine. So the United States is making progress in electric vehicle market growth, but still has quite a ways to go to catch up to Europe and China, and in our goals to get to 100%. So just a little bit more about the US market. It's really dominated by just a couple of manufacturers, mainly Tesla, accounts for a large share of the electric vehicles sold in the United States today. Volvo is also a significant contributor. And then many other manufacturers are offering electric vehicle models, but with relatively limited sales share at present. The second panel of the chart here with the green and gray just shows the breakdown of battery electric vehicles in green and plug-in hybrids in gray. So you can see which manufacturers are offering which type of vehicle. And the right side of the panel just shows the total market share of each manufacturer in the region. So you can see that, for example, Toyota, which is the largest, has the largest sales for total light-duty vehicles in the United States, is doing relatively poorly in terms of EV penetration. And we expect that the companies that are really focusing on EVs are likely to do better in the future, such as Tesla, which keeps growing. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the major policies and targets going on in the US right now. So the United States White House and President Biden have electrification targets for both light and heavy duty vehicles. The targets that they've set are to sell 50% light-duty vehicles, light-duty electric vehicles by 2030, and then for heavy-duty vehicles, 30% electric vehicles by 2030 and 100% by 2040. Meanwhile, California and some other states are moving ahead of that with more ambitious requirements. So California has a requirement that 68% of light-duty vehicle sales need to be electric by 2030, moving to 100% by 2035. And a number of other states have already started to adopt those same requirements, and we expect that to continue. So that will help us get to the national goals as well. Meanwhile, this year, it's very exciting in terms of U.S. policy. The United States Environmental Protection Agency is planning to propose new national standards, greenhouse gas standards for both light and heavy-duty vehicles, and we expect those standards to be significantly more ambitious than the last round of standards, which should help to push electrification into the marketplace. We expect those proposals basically any day now in late March or early April, with the rulemakings to be finalized at the end of this year or early next year. So policy in the US is really pushing towards electrification to try to meet those targets. So now I'm going to talk about some kind of overarching trends in the United States. The first one is how manufacturing costs are changing for electric vehicles and what that's going to mean for the market. So we've really been surprised over the last few years at just how quickly battery costs have come down. If we think back even 5 years ago, we knew that electrification was coming, but we didn't know it was coming this fast. And in particular, we didn't know that battery costs were going to come down quite as much as they have. So that's been very exciting. And it's not over yet. We expect battery manufacturing costs to come down even further. And so this graph is just showing a number of projections for how those battery costs have come down over, or are expected to come down over time, with the dotted black line being ICCT's our internal assumption for battery cost declines. And we expect the battery costs to continue to decline over time, even as demand for minerals ramps up. And so that's going to lead into lowering costs for electric vehicles. So electric vehicle prices have been coming down, and we expect those to continue to decline to the point where electric vehicles will be even cheaper to purchase than gasoline or diesel cars or pickup trucks. Even without policy incentives, we expect that to happen within the next few years. So here I'm showing a cost analysis that we've done at ICCT, projecting what the average cost for electric vehicles are going to be for cars on top and pickup trucks on the bottom. The different colors are showing different ranges. So there's many different options on the market. And of course, the electric vehicles that have shorter ranges, say 150 or 200 miles, are going to be cheaper than those with longer ranges up to 400 miles. The black dotted line here is our expected cost of the average gasoline car and gasoline pickup truck. And we can see that for most of the ranges that we look at, we expect the manufacturing cost of electric vehicles to be cheaper than gasoline for cars well before 2030, and then for pickups kind of around 2030. And so this is, again, before policy incentives, and also before we consider the lower cost of charging on electricity compared to filling up on gasoline. So we expect electric vehicles to be cheaper for manufacturers just to produce than gasoline cars fairly soon. And that is in large part because of the declining battery costs, and then also because there are some savings that manufacturers can achieve from the simpler design and engineering and fewer components of electric vehicles compared to gasoline and diesel vehicles. So that's very exciting, and it's going to really help support the goals that we have for rapid electrification in the US and the standards that we have coming. And we also expect to see similar trends for heavy-duty vehicles for zero-emission vehicle prices coming down over time. So here I'm showing you prices for a bunch of different classes. Heavy-duty vehicles are very diverse. So we have a small to large trucks and then different kinds of buses shown here. I won't go into too much detail, But in the red line there shows our projected cost of diesel trucks and buses over time through 2035. And then the blue line, for now, I'll just focus on the dark blue line, shows our projected cost of battery electric trucks and buses. And we see that for several of these classes, we expect to see battery electric trucks and buses be as cheap as or cheaper than the diesel alternative before 2030. For some others, it's a bit more challenging, particularly long haul tractor trucks. And then in green, the dark green is for fuel cell electric trucks and buses, which we expect to be more expensive, but still could be competitive for the bus segments in particular. The lighter lines show with policy incentives, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. So overall, for both light and heavy duty vehicles, we expect to see zero emission vehicle prices, manufacturing costs come down over time, and that's really going to help fuel the transition to electric vehicles. So now I'm going to get into, a very big topic that's been going on in the U.S. for the last few months. This is the Inflation Reduction Act. This was a major law that was passed by the U.S. Congress and signed by the president in August of 2022. It included billions of dollars of funding for hundreds of billions of dollars for funding for climate action. And this includes several incentives for promoting electric vehicles. And we really expect this to, on top of the declining manufacturing costs for electric vehicles, these incentives will really help us meet our policy targets for electrification in the US. So there's two main tax credits for electric vehicles that I'll talk about. One of them has been in the news a lot lately, and this is the electric vehicle tax credit for kind of personal passenger vehicles. And this is up to $7,500. But there's a number of very specific requirements. So these electric vehicles must be assembled in North America to be eligible for this tax credit. And then half of the value of the tax credit depends on the battery components being manufactured in the US. It's a certain percentage that increases over time of the battery components that have to be manufactured in the US. And then also a certain percentage of critical battery minerals in the electric vehicle that need to come from countries with which the U.S. has free trade agreements. And so this has been a really big deal because these minerals are very important for the production of electric vehicles. The U.S. only has so many free trade agreements. So this is really going to give a leg up to countries that we already have free trade agreements with. The demand for these minerals in the United States is going to really skyrocket from now on, given that the support from the IRA. There's also requirements having to do with income and vehicle purchase price. So there's caps on the income of the consumer who can claim this tax credit, and then there's also caps on the prices of the vehicles. So the tax incentive is really only available for people with not high income and for electric vehicles that are not in the luxury segment. Then there's also a requirement for this tax credit that none of the components of the vehicle come from entities of concern. And this is something that still is not clear what this is going to mean in the United States. The Treasury Department in the federal government still has to decide what entities of concern means and which countries that is going to point to. Some people speculate that that could mean China, and so that an electric vehicle that has any component or any minerals from China would not be eligible for the tax credit, which would be a big deal. But that still has not been clarified by the federal government, and we're waiting for that. The other tax credit, important tax credit in the Inflation Reduction Act, is one for commercial vehicles, and this includes trucks and buses, and it looks like it's also going to include leased cars that are not bought by the consumer, but leased to the consumer. And this would be up to $7,500 for cars, and then up to $40,000 for trucks and buses. So fairly significant for heavy duty vehicles. And I believe it's the first time that there's been this kind of significant financial support at the federal level for electric trucks and buses in the United States. So it's really very exciting for the heavy duty vehicle market. And there's none of these restrictions about assembly or where the components come from applies to the commercial vehicle tax credit. There's also some other relevant tax credits that I'll just mention really quickly. There's one for the production of clean hydrogen, and then there's other provisions on charging infrastructure, and those elements will also help fuel the rollout of zero emission vehicles. So we've done some work modeling what the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act is likely to have on the U.S. electric vehicle market. And when we take into account all of those various requirements and provisions, et cetera. And so I want to share those results with you today, because we're finding that it's likely that these tax credits are going to have a very significant influence on accelerating electric vehicle adoption in the United States. So here I'm showing you our projections of electric vehicle adoption with and without the Inflation Reduction Act for light-duty vehicles on the left and heavy-duty vehicles on the right. So the faintest kind of blue line on the bottom of both graphs is our baseline projection of electric vehicle penetration without the Inflation Reduction Act. And then the other colors show penetration of electric vehicles under various scenarios of the Inflation Reduction Act and exactly how it's going to be implemented and used by consumers and manufacturers. So there's still some uncertainty on that. But we're finding that for light-duty vehicles, most of these scenarios have electric vehicle penetration actually higher than 50% by 2030. So I mentioned a few slides ago that President Biden and the White House have a goal of 50% electric vehicle sales share by 2030. And what we're finding is that the IRA is going to enable us to meet or even exceed that goal of 50% by 2030. And then with the U.S. federal greenhouse gas standards coming, we could potentially get even higher than that with the combined influence of the financial support in the IRA and regulation on the automakers. So that's very exciting. It shows that the electrification transition can potentially be very, very rapid over the coming decade. And then for heavy duty vehicles on the right, we're also seeing very high penetration of zero emission heavy duty vehicles by 2030 of around 40% or more. And again, President Biden and the White House's goal for heavy duty vehicles is actually only 30% zero emission vehicle sales share by 2030. So we're showing that the IRA could help us significantly exceed that in the 2030 timeframe and put us well on the path to getting to 100% by 2040. So that's very exciting. And then this slide just breaks down the heavy duty results by segment because, again, the different classes of trucks and buses are so different. So I won't go through this in detail, but just to highlight a couple things for certain types of heavy duty vehicles. So for example, small trucks and refuse trucks, those are both on the left here. We're seeing, above 60% electric vehicle penetration by 2030, very, very high rates because those segments it's going to be relatively easier and cheaper to electrify than some of the others. And then I'll also point out heavy duty or long haul tractor trucks, which is on the upper right. And this is really the most challenging segment because these are very large trucks and they drive very long distances. Electrification is going to be more expensive and more challenging, but we're still seeing electric vehicle or penetration rates of around 20% by 2030, which would be a pretty major transformation from today's market with the IRA. And I should mention that all the results that I'm showing you are available in reports published on our website, and so each slide has a link to where you can find this on our website. And then just one more point I'll make about our assessment of the impacts of the IRA is that for heavy duty vehicles, we looked at both battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. We didn't look at hydrogen for the light duty market, just for heavy duty. And there is this fairly significant tax credit for clean hydrogen in the IRA of up to $3 per kilogram, which is very significant. But we're finding that even with that tax credit, we still are expecting very low penetration of hydrogen in the heavy duty market. We're really only expecting, a few percent in some of the bus segments, but none in trucking. And that's because even with the tax credit for clean hydrogen, we expect clean hydrogen to still be very expensive to produce and supply to the transportation sector. And then fuel cell electric trucks especially are more expensive to make than battery electric trucks. So we have more expensive manufacturing costs and then more expensive fueling costs. And together that makes it very challenging to foresee hydrogen penetration in the heavy duty vehicle market. And that kind of emphasizes that the high ZEV penetration that I was showing a couple of slides ago is mainly coming from very heavy penetration of battery electric trucks and buses, which is, again, very exciting. So now I'm going to move on to, what this means for the United States' role in global vehicle markets. To date, the United States has been a very significant net importer of light-duty vehicles, and there's a chance that that could change during the transition to electric vehicles. So this slide shows global trade flows of electric vehicles across different countries. And some things here kind of, line up with the first slide I showed about how China and Europe are ahead in terms of electrification. They produce and use, many more electric vehicles than any of the other regions. But in blue, kind of closer to the bottom, we see the United States production of electric vehicles on the left, and then how many electric vehicles are sold in the US on the right side. And so the United States actually produces significantly more electric vehicles than we consume within the country, and we're a net exporter of electric vehicles. And this has in large part to do with Tesla, but it does just kind of show that there's the opportunity for the United States to change its position in the global vehicle market if we manage to, maintain our momentum behind domestic production of electric vehicles. And that's exactly what the Inflation Reduction Act and all of those different requirements about sourcing and assembly, that's meant to support our position in the global the global electric vehicle market. The various requirements about having to be assembled in North America and the different components being produced in the United States, that is meant to support the continued buildup of a domestic electric vehicle market in hopes that we can become a global leader in electric vehicle manufacturing and be a net exporter of electric vehicles. So that's what our policymakers were hoping for when they put those provisions into the Inflation Reduction Act. So in a study that we published a year or two ago, we looked, and so this was before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. We looked at some different scenarios of what could happen in the future to electric vehicle trade flows in the United States, to just kind of highlight, the magnitude of some of the changes that could be coming. So in this first scenario here, which I think now is the most relevant given the Inflation Reduction Act, this is a scenario where we continue to really ramp up domestic production of electric vehicles and import less than we export. And here the United States could become, a very significant electric vehicle exporter. Whereas in the bottom scenario, this would be a scenario where the U.S. electric vehicle market is not really supported, and we start importing a lot more than we export. But given that we now have the Inflation Reduction Act in place supporting our domestic manufacturing of electric vehicles, the top scenario, seems more likely, and really could help support a transformation of the United States' place in the global vehicle market. So that's very exciting. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about what this could potentially mean for Latin America and the Caribbean. So, one thing, there's been a lot of focus on minerals and countries that we have free trade agreements with, because again, half of the value of the passenger electric vehicle tax credit from the Inflation Reduction Act depends on the critical minerals in electric vehicles being sourced from countries we have free trade agreements with. So, many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean could really be a focus here. and I'm just listing out all of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that the United States already has free trade agreements with. And some of these countries have potentially large amounts of minerals. So, for example, Chile has significant resources of lithium and I believe it's copper. And so, because the auto manufacturers in the United States are really going to be incentivized to use minerals from countries we have free trade agreements with, we expect the demand for copper, lithium, and other minerals from from Chile and these other countries to really increase. So there is the potential for these countries to really benefit from increasing export to these minerals to the United States and to really build up the mining and mineral refining sectors. Another important point here is that the electric vehicles, to be eligible for this tax credit, have to be assembled in North America, and that includes Mexico. And so United States already buys a lot of vehicles assembled in Mexico. And this requirement in the Inflation Reduction Act is just going to continue supporting that relationship and increasing the demand for electric vehicles that are assembled in Mexico. So there's really large potential for growth there, especially considering that from what I just showed, we expect very rapid growth of the electric vehicle market in the United States, very rapid growth of sales. And since the electric vehicles assembled in Mexico are going to get this preferential treatment, that is a very rapidly expanding opportunity for Mexico. And then one last thing is just that given that it now seems likely that the United States is going to be developing a significant international market. I'm sorry. Developing a very, very significant domestic manufacturing market for electric vehicles, that will increase the options that are available for export to other countries, including Latin America and the Caribbean. So we expect that manufacturers in U.S. plants are going to be developing more and more electric vehicle models that will be, available in other countries as well. And so other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean could benefit from just the increased development of that industry in the United States. So that is all of the slides that I have now, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Stephanie, thank you very much for your presentation and all the data and all the graphics. I think it was very informative to be able to see the trends and see how really the US is taking the lead in becoming, right? China is the leader currently in Europe, as you show in the graph, but currently with this sort of interest and agenda of changing that paradigm. And as a South American region and Latin America, it's connected to the US, there's definitely many benefits that can come to the region. So we do have a couple of questions that we also are receiving from the audience, but we're also receiving, we also kind of work together with the team to come up with a couple of questions. And I'm gonna start with those questions, and later I'm gonna sort of read some of the questions from the audience. And I invite the audience to continue putting the questions on our channel on YouTube on the comment section. So the first questions that we had planned for you today was related to the demand for minerals. So we're thinking that there are several countries in the region that have potential to import minerals, right? Such as Argentina, Chile, Bolivia. Those are countries that have very large productions and reserves of lithium mainly. So we're wondering how can the U.S. works with these countries to develop a sustainable extraction of those minerals and bring development to the region, right? So what are we see the interest of the U.S. in connecting and becoming a leader, but definitely how can this sort of emerging market generate also benefits for the region?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. This is a very important point, and it's a really big opportunity for these countries that have significant resources of these minerals to build up what will hopefully be a sustainable mining industry. And I should also mention that it's not just the United States that is going to be increasing its demand of these minerals. I mean, the U.S. will be trying to import more from these countries in Latin America and the Caribbean because of our free trade agreements. But the electric vehicle transition is going to be global, and even Europe and China, which are already fairly far ahead, are going to need to continue rapidly increasing electric vehicle production to keep up with the just global trends, and they will continue. They will also have continuing increased demand for these minerals. So overall, globally, there's going to be huge demand for these minerals. And it's a really big economic opportunity for the countries that are able to produce them. But at the same time, the mining industry has not always been one of the most sustainable industries, and it's important that as we grow and we're supporting climate mitigation with the electric vehicle transition, that the production of the minerals does not make the problem any worse. So some important things to keep in mind, are human rights in mining, and making sure that the workers who are working in these mines are being supported and not exploited. Switching to using renewable energy in the mining processes, and then also responsible management of water to try to mitigate pollution. So those are just a few of the important things that will be that countries that really want to take advantage of this trend in battery mineral demand are going to have to keep an eye on and work towards as they develop their mining industries.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to move on with questions from the audience and try to respond to a couple of the questions that we received earlier throughout the presentation, your presentation. And I think one relevant question is related to the global scenario right now, as we see sort of the conflicts with Russia and Ukraine, and we're seeing also sort of this new market agreements and international agreements with sort of like the large countries such as Brazil, India, Russia that belong to the BRICS, and also the sort of the question mentioned sort of African nations leaning more towards East than the West. So how can all these different scenarios, some of them may add or contribute to sort of foster the U.S. Electrification efforts, but then some of them also maybe are changing, sort of altering potential demand from outside from U.S. Vehicles, right? So as you look at the global market and the global scenario, what are some of the insights that ICCT is having for the future? Is this changing anything of the legislation that was passed and all the recent efforts, or are you very confident that the scenario or the predictions that ICCT just shared are maintaining or are going to continue?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of the conflict that's going on today, such as with Russia, kind of emphasizes the importance of cooperation across the Americas of the United States with Latin America and the Caribbean, and that there's a really big opportunity for the countries across the Americas to support each other's economic development. And in the long run, I mean, the conflict going on with Russia and Ukraine is just going to hurt Russia. It's already hurting the demand for their oil and gas exports, and it's a declining market, and it is going to be as the entire world moves towards electric vehicles and towards renewable energy. So they're kind of just cutting themselves off even more than they already are just by global trends.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I think that another relevant question that as we place, Latin America in this scenario, is a question of what's going to happen with the combustion engine vehicles, right? So as the U.S. is putting all these incentives to change their fleet, right? What happens with used vehicles, right, or old vehicles? And is the sort of legislation that's being passed in the U.S. also in some way regulating the final life of that vehicle inside the territory, or there is a potential of, let's say, used vehicles actually being exported to developing nations, right? Not only Latin America, but other countries, right? So how is U.S. maybe planning on, at the same time, incentivizing their electrification, but then not playing against, right? Because if you don't regulate sort of what's happening with combustion engines, that's probably going to be sell somewhere else, right? Or sent somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. But it kind of speaks, so the long lifetime of these vehicles speaks to the critical importance of moving as fast as we can towards 100% production of electric vehicles, because the longer that we keep producing internal combustion engine vehicles, the longer they're going to be on the road and consuming gasoline and diesel. So really the most important thing is to just switch as fast as we can towards 100% electric vehicle production, to try to keep those internal combustion engine vehicles, to try to get them off the roads sooner, just understanding that there's going to be this lag. So that's what we're really focused on trying to do. The United States policies are moving in that direction. They're not yet going to get us all of the way there. So California and a few other states so far have committed to 100% electric vehicles by 2035. That does include up to 20% plug-in hybrids. We expect that percentage in reality to be lower because they're more expensive vehicles to produce, but there will potentially even still be some gasoline engines in new vehicles sold in California in 2035. And then the federal policies, we expect the greenhouse gas standards that will be proposed soon to go out to 2030, maybe 2032, but not all the way out to 2035. So it's unlikely that the federal government is going to require the phase out of internal combustion engine vehicles at this point. That has happened, or that is happening rather in Europe. Europe is in the process of finalizing their new light duty vehicle CO2 standards that do go to zero, basically in 2035. And we will get there in the United States, but it won't be mandated by policy this year. That being said, we do still expect internal combustion engine vehicles to stop being produced and sold in the United States around that kind of time frame. And so there probably will still be sales of used vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, within the United States and then exported to other countries. So, for example, African countries after that point. And yes, that will prolong the use of fossil fuels in those vehicles, but that just again speaks to the urgency of trying to stop producing those vehicles in the first place.
No, yeah, definitely. That's definitely a key element and needed element to foster the electrification. And we agree that the quicker that we can move forward, it's definitely important. And following with the sort of perspective on the U.S., right, and trying to see, okay, what are some of the lessons that we can learn as a region of what the U.S. is already implementing and how it's trying to foster its own, citizens to invest in private vehicles. One question that I have is really, what would be, or how is a successful way to actually, make the average citizen aware of these incentives, right? Because it's in the policy, but perhaps there are some fears about the technology. Perhaps there's not monetary knowledge of really how the tax incentive works, right? And how they will receive it. So how is that translation or trickle down from, okay, it's already said in the policy, but how do we really make average citizens confident in the technology, right? In, okay, I can rely on a electric vehicle and let my combustion engine vehicle behind, and how do we make sure that they're aware of this economic benefits, right? Or like total cost of ownership, or this kind of projection of cost, right? Which is, it requires some sort of financial knowledge to be aware of, okay, how the operational costs decrease throughout the lifetime of the vehicle, right? How do we encourage citizens to really move and acquire electric vehicles?
Yeah, no, this is a really important point. We're not going to get the benefit of these incentives if people are not actually using them. There is one it seems like a small, but it's actually a very significant change in this tax credit compared to a previous version in the United States. And that is that the tax credit in the IRA can be claimed at the point of purchase rather than claimed when someone's filing their taxes at the end of the year. And that's a really important point because many consumers will react more if they can see that they're saving the money right now. Like when they go to the dealer, I'm spending less money out of my pocket, today in buying this electric vehicle compared to the similar kind of gasoline vehicle. So that is a really important change that should help to show consumers just how much money they're saving in a more kind of real way. But at the end of the day, people do have to be aware of these things, and the most important interface between the consumer and that incentive is the dealership. And so, we hope that manufacturers are going to be working with their dealers because the manufacturers also have, an incentive in educating the consumer so that the consumer uses the incentive and buys more of their vehicles. It will also help the manufacturers meet their various policy targets and requirements in California and at the federal level. And so there is a lot of benefit to the manufacturers to be working with their dealers, making sure that the dealers are educated about the incentives so that they can help the customers understand exactly how much money they're saving in buying electric vehicles today.
Thank you, Stephanie. And another follow-up question is related to this sort of differences that we see across like U.S. regions, right, with demand for EV vehicles, right? And sort of the question is, what are the main differences that cause sort of that differences on the demand of EV vehicles within the United States?
So I believe the main driver behind regional differences is state regulation. So as I've been mentioning, California and some other states have more ambitious requirements for ZEV sales share than the federal standards. That's really been driving and leading the electric vehicle market in the United States. So there's California and there's 14 or 15 other states that have adopted an earlier version of California's ZEV requirements that comprise 40% of the United States auto market. So to date, 40% of the United States vehicle market has been in states that have more ambitious ZEV requirements than the national standards. California has recently updated those to the total phase out of conventional cars by 2035, and that's been adopted by maybe 6 other states so far, but we expect other states to continue to adopt those. So many of the same states that adopted the earlier version of the standards, and so those are states where we do expect to see leading the electric vehicle market in the United States. So that's many states in the Northeast of the United States and the Pacific Northwest. As well as California, and then a few others like Colorado. So that's the regulation has been a major driver behind supporting the electric vehicle market in some states in the United States.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I think that one point that we're kind of receiving multiple questions that are similar from the audience. If you can explain again a little bit about sort of how this the Inflation Reduction Act. What are the countries that qualify for that sort of benefits in a way, right? So indirectly, right? Some of the countries that the U.S. has a free trade agreement, and basically the question is, would the incentives be felt in a reduced price for all types of EVs made in U.S. or Mexico or Latin America, right? So I think that kind of clarifying that point, if maybe we can go back to the slide to show to the audience what are sort of the countries that the U.S. has a free trade agreement, and also what are exactly the components, right? So the part of the minerals and the part of the components.
Yes. So pulling up that slide again now. I don't know if I need to do anything to share it again. But the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that the United States has free trade agreements with are Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, and Peru. And so the significance here is that half of the value of the tax credit, so half of the $7,500, will be eligible for electric vehicles that have a certain percentage of critical minerals coming from these countries or other countries the United States has free trade agreements with. And that starts at maybe 40% and it increases over time, the percentage of critical minerals that have to come from these countries. And so what that means is that there's going to be, significantly increased demand for minerals from these countries because electric vehicles that manage to source their minerals from these countries are going to be eligible for more of the tax credit than they otherwise would be if they were sourcing their minerals from countries where we don't have free trade agreements. The other half of the tax credit is for battery components being manufactured in the United States. And there's still some uncertainty about what exactly that means, which battery components, what qualifies as a component, that the United States Treasury Department is going to clarify, and we're waiting for that clarification. And then the requirement about being assembled in North America, that applies to any vehicle to qualify for any amount of the tax credit. So only vehicles that are assembled in Mexico, United States, Canada are eligible to receive any of these incentives. So it's an sort of an and or. So a vehicle that's manufactured or assembled, a vehicle that's assembled in Mexico and produced with battery components from the United States and using minerals from Chile would qualify for the entire tax credit. A vehicle that's assembled in Mexico uses battery components from the United States, but does not use critical minerals from a country we have a free trade agreement with, would only qualify for half of the tax credit. So I know this is very confusing, but I hope that helps clarify.
No, that definitely clarified, Stephanie. And I'm going to follow up with another question from the audience. So Jorge is asking, what's the deadline for Electrify America initiative? But basically kind of restating the question. So you mentioned all these targets, right? You mentioned that the US has specific targets and we can maybe go back to those and repeat those. But also what are some of like the hard deadlines, right? Like California that said, okay, by 2035, 100% have to be renewable, right? What are some other very like strict or hard deadlines that the US is thinking of?
Yeah, so this is confusing as well because there's different targets for the United States at the national level and for the different states and different targets for light and heavy duty vehicles. So I'll start with light duty vehicles at the national level. The only target is 50% EV sales share by 2030. There is no national level target for 100% EVs yet, at least. And we're expecting the federal government to propose new greenhouse gas standards that could, help promote electric vehicle sales share around or above 50% by 2030, potentially. For the states, California and now maybe 6 other states require 100% electric vehicle sales by 2035. And that includes up to 20% of plug-in hybrids that could still have a gasoline engine. So it's not a 100% gasoline phase out by 2035. It's a mostly gasoline phase out. And again, that's only for specific states that have chosen to adopt California's requirements. Now, for heavy duty vehicles at the national level, the White House target is 30% zero emission vehicles. So this could include battery electric heavy duty vehicles and also hydrogen. So 30% zero emission vehicles by 2030 and 100% by 2040. So there is a 100% target for heavy duty vehicles at the national scale. In the states, California so far has only finalized heavy duty zero emission vehicle requirements through that go to, I'm not quite sure, it's something like maybe 70%. I'm not sure exactly what it is. California is right now in the process of changing that and adopting a new target to require 100% zero emission heavy duty vehicles by 2040, or it could be earlier than that even. And some of the other states may adopt that as well. So we could see heavy-duty vehicles, diesel phased out before 2040 in some states, and then again, the national target is by 2040.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie, for all the clarifications. So we're moving towards the end of the webinar, so I'm still gonna ask a couple, maybe like 2 more questions. So another question was from Leonardo. He's asking if there is any sort of technological enhancement from batteries, or maybe any sort of production abroad from these policies, right? Or it has to be like 100% produce the battery in the US, right? So is there any sort of, is there going to be just extraction of minerals from other countries that the US has free trade agreements, or is there any sort of manufacture that can happen outside?
So I have to say that this is not yet completely clear because we're still waiting for the Federal Treasury Department to issue clear guidance on how to interpret these requirements. And it's also it's already very confusing. So there's the requirement on critical minerals coming from countries we have free trade agreements with. That is only a requirement for a certain percentage of the minerals. So I don't know off the top of my head, but it's something like 40% in 2025 and increasing to 80% by 2032 or something like that. So it's not 100% of critical minerals have to be from these countries, but a certain percentage. And then the part about battery components. So we don't know what components, and we don't know what qualifies as a component. That's something that is not clear, and that the federal government needs to clarify. And that again only applies to a certain percentage that increases over time. So it's not 100% of battery components need to be produced in the United States, but a minimum percent.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. So I do have another question that comes more related to the work that we're doing in Latin America. So we're really promoting also the electrification through public transit, right? Mainly, there's a very large part of the distribution of trips happening through public transport in the region, right? So we see that the sort of the catalyzer or the beginning of electrification in the region is happening through government investments in electric bus fleets, right? So also as the U.S. is planning on electrifying, right, we're seeing all this effort. What is ICCT perspective on the production of buses, right? Which is something that really the Latin America, perhaps it's what is consuming right now, and mainly we're buying from China. Most of the buses are coming from that market, right? But considering sort of the closeness of the U.S. and Mexico and North America, which are big producers of vehicles, right? What are some of the things that you're seeing related to like the heavy vehicles, right, and bus production that can maybe also sort of trickle down or be beneficial for the rest of the region?
Yeah, so I mean, as the U.S. moves rapidly towards electrification of heavy-duty vehicles and buses in addition to cars, we're just going to see increasing demand for importing those electric buses from other countries. So there is definitely an increase in opportunity for other countries to export electric buses to the United States. And then another thing I'll emphasize is that many of the benefits of electric buses are very local and are given to the people who live there from the reduced pollution. So this is just a really important point, that buses are a significant contributor to emissions and air pollution in urban areas where they operate a lot. And that switching to electric can be a very effective strategy to reducing air pollution for people who live there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you very much. So I'm gonna read one more last question from the audience, and after that, we're probably gonna have to say goodbye because we're going beyond our time. So one of the questions was related to the total cost of ownership, right? So we're seeing this emerging trend, and we're seeing sort of the tax incentive that are being placed But really, what is the equation right now? As we're adding these benefits and prices of EVs are going down, right? As we look at the total cost of ownership, is it really the electric vehicles becoming competitive with this sort of incentives, or are they still really above market level when we compare with combustion engine vehicles?
Yeah, so the analysis that we've done, that is, basically on kind of average cars, pickups, et cetera, what we're finding is that the total cost of ownership is cheaper for electric vehicles purchased today, when we also consider the policy incentives that exist. So it's already cheaper for consumers to go out and buy an electric vehicle, and operate it compared to a gasoline car or pickup truck. And so that's really exciting. We're already there. We need those costs to come down even further and for consumers to become increasingly aware of the benefits and the cost savings of electric vehicles in order to get out to a broader swath of the population, overcome the kind of initial hesitancy in the switch to the new technology. And I think we're going to get there with the help of the policy incentives we have and the fact that electric vehicle prices just keep coming down. It's happening much more rapidly than we had thought could possibly happen even just a few years ago. So it's been super exciting to see this revolution in the market. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me for this webinar. There have been very insightful and great questions, and I've really enjoyed being here.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate having you here, and it's definitely great the work that ICCT is doing, sort of providing all this analysis and showing to us and to the rest of the readers and the audience that's watching us, sort of what is the US is doing and how it's changing. The market is growing, and as you mentioned, the last point, right? We're already there, and EVs are really a means to reduce emissions and to address so many of the issues that we have right now, such as climate change, health issues, local pollution, as you mentioned, also related to emissions from buses, etc. So at UNEP, we definitely see electric mobility as a means to all these ends, right? We don't just pursue electrification, but we are definitely looking at the benefits and the wider benefits that we have. And I appreciate, Stephanie, all the questions. I know that at the beginning, maybe some of the questions, because we're so focused, from a regional level, from Latin America, we're sort of asking, okay, how this can benefit us or generate benefits from foreign policy. But I do want to point out that, and conclude with this, right? I think that the US policies, the policies itself are something that we can learn from, right? So I think that countries can really observe these measures that the US is doing to promote electrification and see, okay, how can we find ways to articulate this similar policies to promote electrification, but also how they can, despite perhaps the protective measures that certain markets are placing, right, set up new legislative and incentives and measures that can really sort of benefit despite perhaps some barriers, right? But I'm seeing the US story as lessons learned. I think that we can learn a lot from the efforts that the US is placing. And definitely we have a lot of work to do also on this side to really ensure that we move forward as quick as you guys are moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.